Please join me in sharing the responsive reading printed in our bulletin. Pack nothing. Bring only your determination to serve and your willingness to be free. Don't wait for the bread to rise. Take nourishment with your journey. Be ready. Do not hesitate to leave your old ways behind. Only surrender to the need of time, to love justice, and walk humbly with your God. Welcome to Fountain Street Church. I appreciate gathering with you this morning for a couple of hours together down here. My name is Janet Peterson, and lucky for me, my grandparents brought their kids to this church somewhere around 1915. If you are new, an extra welcome. You need to know that skeptics and believers belong here. We count on each other to ask questions and share answers. Here, you are free to expand your knowledge and your heart. Join us after the service for social hour and offer your story. So speaking of service, we are an independent institution and we govern ourselves. I'm heading this year's nominating committee. We will present to the membership candidates for 3-year terms on the governing board, candidates for the Little Fair Great Speakers Board, and the foundation board. The committee consists of governing board members Jack Petit, Gary Eberly, and myself, and members at large Kirsten Lundeen, Mark Altoff, and another member to be named. Our monthly meetings will be at 5:15 beginning tomorrow. At Fountain Street Church, we believe that everyone desires a life that is meaningful, a life that makes a difference. The nominating committee is asking you to give some thought and give us suggestions regarding candidates that will continue to make a difference, ask questions, and work together to help grow and change the world. We welcome all of you to be a part of that. You belong here. We belong here together. Welcome.
Hello out there. My name is Josh with Wazobia. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm here to teach you a song. It's a very simple song. This song is for anyone who's ever sang in a choir, sang for things like church, sang in the shower. So basically everyone out there. I'm happy to see the choir up front. The song goes like this. Oh, 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 oh. Excellent. We're going to start up a little rhythm to get that going. Song. We're going to do another song called E Longa Salamongo. It's a Congolese song of greeting and celebration, which seems like a perfect song for today. The words go, E Longa Salamongo, E Longa Mokaye, E Longa Salamongo, E Longa Mokaye. Elonga, Elonga. 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 And this last one's very important. When we finish this song, we're going to raise our hands in celebration. And with our best inside voices, go, Elonga! Elonga! Excellent. And it's much more fun if we clap our hands for a moment.
Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Thanks so much. Just checking. I want to let you know it's not in the order of service, but these are actually 10 members of the Civic Theater cast of Les Mis who came by of their own volunteer. And I hardly ever get to say it, but thanks also to Alex Hamill, who drummed on the show and is often a guest here at Proudly Street Church. Thank you.
For those who haven't been with us all through Lent, we have done a song from the show almost every Sunday in Lent. Part of our effort to tie the Sundays together musically as well as thematically. And it's a stirring end, although that's not the last scene in the show by any means. It's the one song we all know, right? And it also aligns very much with the theme that Jason brought up earlier, Passover, of people seeking liberation. I'll come back to that story because that's an actual historic event that's represented in Les Miserables, the uprising of 1832. I'll come back to that a little later. I want to say that I did see you back there trying to put money in the plate, and I know you want to give it, so if you want to give it to me afterward, I'm okay with that. I promise it will go where it belongs. See, I do watch you out there. And for those who don't know, today's Thomas Jefferson's birthday. I only mention that because Tom Jefferson is one of our figures in one of our windows. He's the top guy on your right in the back there, just above Abraham Lincoln, not around. So we should wish our windows happy birthday when the time comes. Well, Darwin's over there too. And so Lincoln and Darwin fortunately have exactly the same birthday, same day and years, so we can wish them both the same time. So before I get started, I got to give you a little something to whet your appetite, or at least get you thinking. I danced in a fountain once. I actually did. You probably didn't expect. Fred, dancing in a fountain? That doesn't happen. Well, I did. It was the 1960s. What can I say? And my church youth group met in their little grotto of a room in the downtown Baltimore church where I was a high schooler. And they met on Sunday evenings, and it was a spring night, kind of like this, and it was nice, and the grotto was dark, and we said, let's play. And so we tore out of the building, and you have to understand, in downtown Baltimore, there is an old square, a very formal square called Mount Vernon Place. There's an old monument, Washington Monument, a tall pillar like a Roman column, and it's surrounded on four different gardens that form a crossroads, and one of them is on a slope, and that means they terraced the garden, and that means there are two fountains. So we tore off to the fountains, and we were splashing around inside and lifting it up and doing all that hippie kind of stuff. And we were having a blast. Then we saw a police car, and so we kind of hot-footed it back to the church. And a girl whose name I don't remember, she took my hand. I mean, maybe 16. I was fat. I was not popular. And I don't know if you can remember the first time someone of romantic possibility took your hand, but there's a kind of static electricity you never forget. And she and I, along with the others, ran back to the church. I don't remember her name. I wish I did. But I remember her hand. I remember she had dark hair. And I remember that her bell-bottom pants were wet below the knee. And I remember how breathless and merry we were as we escaped back into the grotto, laughing and playing. I'm much safer here in the pulpit, of course, and so are you. Because I'm much more predictable these days. Now I go outside every day, but it's largely to walk down to the YMCA, get up on the elliptical trainer because it doesn't hurt my knees, and read the Sunday New York Times, which fortunately takes all week. And the good news is that periodically I read stuff that's actually useful right away, not just to my general well-being. This week it happened. I was reading the book review, which is almost as good as reading the book because it makes you sound like you know stuff. And it was a review of a book called American Fun by John Beckman, 4 Centuries of Joyous Revolt. And it explored the ways over history in America oppressed and outsider groups acted out their defiance with merrymaking, acts of raucous jubilation, as the reviewer calls it, that represented demands and outspoken expressions of freedom for people who are frequently denied it. The reviewer goes on and says, both politically directed and self-rewarding, these rebellions had a peculiarly American tinge because they not only promoted their own brand of civility, but as the author says, turned social conflict into joyous upheaval. Joyous upheaval. I guess our little trespass in the fountain was a low wattage version of just that. And you've had your moments too. There's no question somewhere in your youth, at least in your past, I don't know how young you are, you acted out for fun. Remember back in the 60s, the phrase was revolution for the hell of it. Did you ever cut class just so you could do it? How many of you in this room inhaled? I did. It was cool. I was scared. The powerless always revolt by defying the conventions of the powerful. They may not overturn carts or start fires, but they find ways to thumb their nose at authority and do it with a smile. They're going to have fun because we all know that fun is exactly what the people in power don't want us to have. As H.L. Mencken once observed, a Puritan is someone who knows that somewhere, somehow, someone is having fun. Because fun defies order. It is inherently mischievous. It is dangerous to social order. A great example, and a very touching one, happened during World War I in the trenches, somewhere after they had all dug in. The British author and poet Henry Williamson, who was at the time a 19-year-old private, wrote this to his mother. Dear mother, I'm writing from the trenches. It is 11 o'clock in the morning. The ground is sloppy in the trench, but frozen elsewhere. In my mouth is a pipe presented by the Princess Mary. In the pipe is tobacco. Of course, you say, but wait. In the pipe is German tobacco. Ha ha, you say a prisoner. You took it from a prisoner in a captured trench. Oh dear, no. From a German soldier. Yes, a live German soldier from his own trench. Yesterday, the British and Germans met and shook hands in the ground between the trenches and exchanged souvenirs and shook hands. All day Christmas Day, and as I write. Did you ever hear about the Christmas truce? All up and down the Allied and Axis lines, the soldiers, quite defiant of all the people who employed them, decided to celebrate Christmas together. A joyous revolt. Of course, it didn't end the war, but for a moment, they pretended it wasn't there, and for a moment, it wasn't. Of course, incidents like that rarely make the news. Newsmakers want conflict. Someone once described a reporter as someone who says, let's you and him fight, while I write it down. But one case did make history, the one to which we are giving ourselves this morning. Jesus and his little band of, you called them, what did you call them? I called them outlaws. You called them a posse in the early service. Jesus and his band of outlaws, they staged a joyous revolt one spring day in Jerusalem. Tradition and piety, of course, have made it into a day with big organ music and trumpets and a kind of grandiosity that makes it holy and pious. But at the moment, it was as outrageous as anyone stomping in a fountain. It was whimsical, satirical, playful, thumbing your nose at the authorities but not being mean about it. Remember, Jesus rode on a donkey because kings ride on horses. And people waved at him with palms because they didn't have fans. It was mockery and merriment, street theater of the first rank. In my Lenten exploration of sin and suffering and salvation, I have not looked at these sins, the social misbehaviors that always outrage the powers that be. According to my definition of sin, sin causes harm and suffering. So how can anything that merely pokes a finger at the status quo be a sin? Well, let's be honest. Most people use sin to mean you're breaking a rule, either a legal rule or a social convention or a religious expectation. But we also know that rules can become oppressive when they are things that control us rather than help us. Racial segregation was legal for generations, and it took the joyous and continual revolt of others to undo the legal rule because the larger rule was being oppressed. And on Palm Sunday, Jesus broke a lot of rules. He stepped on a lot of toes with the joyous mockery of a mock procession. In our age, though, we don't see things like that much anymore. At least they don't make it into the holy books. I had an experience years ago when I lived in New York City. There was a fellow who worked the street corner. His name was, he called himself Reverend Billy. Maybe you've heard of him. He was a persona. This is not himself, it was a persona he inhabited. He inhabited a Southern gospel preacher, and he wore the white suit and had the pompadour and the Southern drawl and kept a handkerchief to mop his fevered brow, but his message was, consumerism is eating us alive. And he started what he called the Church of Stop Shopping, which meant that he was at his holiest and most effective in December. And he worked the street corners trying to get attention, and he got it. And people were startled and confused and amused and some annoyed. But his was street theater, poking fun at our pretentious values and our forgotten assumptions. I went to see him when I was in New York back in December. Now he's actually a production. It's indoors. It's part of a series of shows he puts on with a choir, and there's amplification and lights. And in fact, when he's done, and during the middle of it, we could all order microbrews and artisanal French fries while we watched. That's what happens, you see. Either a joyous revolt turns into an actual revolt with all of its terror and violence and mayhem, or it becomes absorbed into the culture that it's trying to protest. Some of you remember Woodstock, and you've certainly heard about it, which was at the time a joyous revolt, 3 days of peace and love. But did peace and love result from it? Well, maybe for a few people, but you know who really got a jolt out of Woodstock were the rock concert promoters, the recording artists, and the people who gave and made money. So Woodstock became the last gasp of a joyous protest and the first audition for the rock and roll business culture that now dominates our business. Of course, though, the joyous protest always exists, even as the old one gets absorbed in, a new one shows up. Just as rock and roll and rock music became commercial, hip-hop and rap turned up, and we were scared, that is to say, if you were white, because they used bad language and defiant attitudes, and they looked at you with a hard look, and they sounded menacing, and they were wanting to look menacing, because part of a joyous protest is to make the man quiver, and they did. Of course, it's now been co-opted too. Most of the rap artists of consequence they have their bling because we paid the bling for them to record and us to get the vicarious joy of listening to their protest, if only at a concert. But 20 years ago, when hip-hop was still kind of dangerous, I had my hip-hop moment. Yep, I danced in a fountain, and I had a hip-hop moment. You did not know that about me. Well, I'm at a clergy meeting. We're all doing something very earnest, and we're almost all of us white, and almost all of us at least 30, if not 40 or 50. And of course, when they do worship together, they kind of revert to their Woodstock moments. So they're all holding hands and swaying and kumbayaing all over the place, and I'm nauseated. Because this isn't protest at all, this is nostalgia. It's let's go back to when it was 1968 and we were young and the world was our oyster. That's not a protest, that's a memory tour. Next to me, though, stood a friend, slightly younger woman of color, and we looked at each other with that look at the goofy white people smile on our faces. And so we did our own little protest because we both knew about Naughty by Nature. That's a group, by the way, if you don't know. And they had a hot song then. And while everybody else was swaying back and forth, we were going, hey, ho, hey, hip-hop, hooray, ho. If you don't know the song, go to our Facebook page. I posted a YouTube link. There's nothing cooler than 150 black people going, hey, ho! But two people in one meeting, they just looked funny. But that was a protest. People looked at us. You're ruining our good time. You bet. That's why it's fun. You know, it turned out as I was doing my research, there are at least 5 songs that use hey and ho in some combination. Another rapper did it, Ludacris. I can't even begin to repeat his words. They're way off a church radar, I got to tell you. Jen Wigmore is a woman artist whose voice I find disturbing and whose text is very dark. Those of you who are white and a little bit about my age might remember the Ramones, Hey Ho, Let's Go, which was a radical moment, and now you hear it at ballparks. And the current one is a sweet ballad, it's a kumbaya song, in my opinion. It's a beautiful kumbaya song, Ho Hey by the Lumineers, and it's charming and romantic and sweet, but there's not an ounce of revolt in it, not really. Back in Jerusalem, though, after parading into town on a donkey, Jesus did one more thing that we tend not to notice on Palm Sunday. He went to the temple and he caused trouble. The sacred center of Jerusalem, the sacred center of Judaism, the heart of a culture. He went in and started turning over the tables of the money changers and the merchants who sold doves. It's called the cleansing of the temple because he says, oh, it is written, you have made my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. And he makes quite a little ruckus. In Matthew, it appears in all 4 Gospels, but in John in particular, he takes a whip along and scourges people. Now, you've got to know something, that the merchants and the money changers were legit. They were not interlopers. Jews coming to the temple to make sacrifices came from all over the empire, the Roman Empire. They brought Greek money and Roman money and Egyptian money. And in Judaism, you had to use temple money to buy the doves that you then had sacrificed. So they were not only there legitimately, they were necessary to the cult of Judaism itself. If you turned them over, people couldn't practice their religion. Jesus, we may applaud his lofty, austere spirituality, but in fact, his acts were criminal and they were sacrilegious, and we should not be the least bit surprised he got arrested for them. We may disapprove of the culture that did it, but he was not innocent at all. And it was far from a joyous protest, that part of his day. The reviewer of Beckman's book goes on and has a point. The reviewer says the coarse civility that Beckman says accompanied the communal experience of freedom often teetered on the edge of or descended into mob ferocity. Riotous fun is not always very civil, and it cannot always be restrained. Remember the stirring march that we heard a few moments ago from Les Miserables? It's a scene in the book that is taken from an actual historic moment. A general who was seen to be favorable to the poor had died. And so the poor residents of Paris, quite historically, showed up at his funeral, lining the streets. And they broke into a riot during the funeral and set up barricades in the Faubourg in the center of town, Faubourg Saint-Denis. And there was a war for 2 days until the French army called in the troops and put them down. 800 people died. from that protest. I don't think they did much singing historically. In the end, let's admit, the decorous grandeur and the crass commerce really are safer than the spontaneous merriment that we remember from our youth. Spontaneity really is risky. Merriment can lead very quickly into mayhem. The same Jesus who rode a donkey trashed the temple, and I'm not sure the people who waved the palms would have approved of him trashing the temple. The French Bible scholar Alfred Loisy is famous for one quote. I think it captures the irony and the complexity. He said, and this has to be translated now, Jesus came announcing the kingdom, but what we got was the church. In other words, the great vision of a transformed society was substituted with an institution and all of its cumbersome qualities and its repressive qualities. But would we honestly want the revolution that he promised? The overturned tables, the whips, the scourges, the riots, the mayhem, done with all the happiness of the oppressed, throwing off the oppressors. That's great, unless you're the one they're looking at and waving their whips toward. We crave joy and life, but we honestly and really fear chaos and death. In all honesty, we cannot live the life of a merry prankster except a little bit now and then. We cannot spend our lives stomping in fountains, swaying at rock concerts, or waving palms. But we also know, if we can't do that, that this sin of joyous protest is also a hint of salvation. However frail and transient, those moments when we choose to dance in fountains or wave our arms remind us that life is larger than we remember. It's just bigger than anything we know. Now, I said I walk down to the YMCA and back, and I do that mostly 5 days a week. By the time I do it, it's about 400 times a year. So I know the Pearl Street Bridge really well. And though a couple of weeks ago, the temperatures began to rise and the ice floes that had jammed it up began to let go. It's fun to watch the ice form and let go. And one morning, as I'm coming back from the Ford Museum side going to downtown, the waters had begun to recede, but the ice around the dead stalks that grew up was still there, and they looked like little ballet tutus scattered through the water. And I knew that it wouldn't last the day. It didn't. It was gone the next day. And I can't help but wonder who saw them other than me, and I feel so lucky that I had this moment, kind of like the other moment I get every summer. Because as the waters go down after the spring and they get lower and lower, eventually some rocks between the Blue Bridge and the Pearl Street Bridge come up out of the water. Actually, the water goes down. It's a little outcropping. Occasionally a few weeds will grow there. But sometime in the summer, on a warm, humid morning, the kind that you don't want to be out in because it's just so close, one of those mornings I'll cross that bridge. And as I'm crossing a bridge, a blue heron that comes every year will come down the river just barely above the water, swimming like it does through the air, and go under the bridge, come up a little bit, and then land on that outcrop, and then do that avian origami thing with its wings. And I always watch and wonder if anybody else notices the trucks and the bridges filled with traffic. Because I know that the bird doesn't notice me or the trucks or the cars, doesn't even care, it's just there. I want to be like that blue heron. I want to be like those dead stalks with their icy tutus. And I think you do too, because I think we all long to be so alive that life overflows us, that we can't contain it, that all we can do sometimes is dance or shout or sing or go, hey, oh, that's all we want to do sometimes. Barbara Ehrenreich, wonderful author, scientist, deep rationalist, recently confessed in the New York Times to having had a mystical experience in her teenage years, and always put it aside as evidence of either incipient mental illness or just being up too late the night before. Now, though, she's wondering if there is something to it. Not messages from gods or anything, but that there's something more at work in the universe than even science can put its finger on. As she puts it, could it be that the universe itself is pulsing with a kind of life? Yes, that's exactly it, Barbara. And those of us who are called into clergy life did it because we got that taste at some point. And you did too, when suddenly you took in a breath and it felt like the whole universe was in your lungs. Or you heard a note of music and it felt like the whole sky was alive. Or someone said they loved you and you suddenly felt every cell in your body responding. Yes, the universe itself is alive. It really, really is. And it overflows. It overflows us. It wets out our bell bottoms. It waves our arms. It overturns the money tables of our budgets and our checkbooks. It makes us jaywalk through all the stoplights that tell you to be careful. And that's why you come here. Because even in the safe grandeur of this church, with its reliable stone walls and predictable beauty, the kingdom sometimes breaks through. And sometimes we really do understand the truth of the psalmist who said, yes, this too is a day which the Lord has made. And then we really do rejoice and become glad. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Amen.